You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite and on YouTube. If you want to find us on YouTube, search Bloomberg Global News. The live stream is underway right now. The cameras are lit, and we'd love to meet you in the studio. As we have a little story time today, story time from Washington, another late night on Capitol Hill. And in this storybook, this is like a scene at a House of Cards. The headline on the terminal from our own Billy House: Congressman left hospital bed to head off Mayorkas impeachment. Imagine the optics here. This is the impeachment, of course, of Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Defense, said to be a done deal. Speaker Johnson speaking confidently throughout the day, even though apparently they didn't do a lot of whipping on this because it did not pass. And great drama in the process. As I read here on the terminal from Billy Green, a Texas Democrat who'd been recovering from emergency surgery, entered the House chamber in a wheelchair. Imagine the doors bursting open. Wearing scrubs. Just as it looked like Republican Speaker Johnson had barely enough votes to get the two articles of impeachment approved. That brought us to a tie. 215. Republicans then were forced to flip one vote so it would fail, allowing them to come back another day with a motion to reconsider, I should say. And the speaker this morning said they will do this and it will pass on the next round. We'll see if Al Green will be at that vote. He's with us right now by telephone from his hospital bed, the congressman from Texas, 9th District. Congressman Green, I hope you're feeling well, and I appreciate your joining us today. I guess you were well enough to leave your bed last night. Did you know at the time that you were going to be the deciding vote?
Well, hello, Mr. Mathieu. Thank you for being so kind with your intro. I did not know. I quite candidly thought that the vote would pass, but I knew that I had to do my job. I knew that I wanted my vote to be counted because I know Secretary Mayorkas. I know the good things that he's done. I had an experience with him that I'll recount for you quickly. Had a young man, very young, who was a patient at Texas Children's Hospital. The hospital called my office and said, this young man has been picked up along the border with his mother. They were both undocumented. He came out of his own volition. And they placed him in a place where he had no support system. And this child was a dialysis patient, and he needed to get back. So we contacted the secretary's office, and he made it possible through what's called parole for this child's life to be spared. I sincerely believe this. When we arrived there, there was a team of doctors waiting. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning to take this child in. This parole has worked to save lives. It's not just an open gate for people to walk through. Secretary Mayorkas is a responsible person. He's not a ruthless, reckless, lawless demagogue. He's a responsible person who tries to treat people fairly. So thank you.
Well, certainly your Republican colleagues think he's a big part of the problem, while Democrats say he's simply carrying out the policies of Joe Biden. You've been working in Congress for a couple of minutes, Representative. What do you make of the current state of affairs here with this Republican conference? You got pretty used to Nancy Pelosi never bringing a bill to the floor, as they say, without knowing it would pass. What we saw last night was the definition of chaos, wasn't it?
Well, you're right. Eminently correct. Speaker Pelosi had her ducks in a row, as they say, all in order. I am amazed that it did not pass, to be quite candid. I thought that it would. So I can only say that this is a time of giving people, I suppose, the opportunity to understand that this business sometimes requires that you have to negotiate as opposed to require persons to capitulate. We've entered an era wherein dictation as opposed to negotiation is the order of the day, it seems. And this is not going to work. It's not going to work for Democrats, and it won't work for Republicans. We are going to have to work together on many of these issues, the big ones, to get them done. They have to be issues that we care about enough to make concessions on. An issue of paramount importance was in the Senate. My colleagues in the Senate, Republican colleagues, demanded certain things. There was literally capitulation. When they got what they wanted, they reneged on their own deal, the deal that they brought to the table. They have now decided it's not worth voting on. At some point, we have to realize that for some, not all, but for some people, the crisis at the border is a great political tool for the upcoming election. Unfortunate, but true.
I have to ask you, Congressman, what you see going forward here, because it does appear, according to the Speaker, there will be another round to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. He says it will pass. We also know that the Senate's working up a standalone bill on Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. It doesn't have the border, and I wonder if you see either, if not both of those, passing in the House.
My belief is that Mr. Mayorkas will be impeached. That's not my desire, and I will do all that I can to prevent it. But the numbers are there if they're all aligned properly. With reference to the bill that might come our way that deals with Taiwan, hopefully, and some other aid for the Palestinians, I would hope. Israel would be in there, of course, and of course Ukraine. Those are important issues. I'm very much concerned about all of them, but I will be very candid with you, dear sir. I have great concern for what's happening in Gaza. People are living almost in conditions unfit for animals. And we're not doing enough to circumvent the killing of innocent babies. You can, in the name of justice, create an injustice. It won't make it justice because you did it in the name of justice. So I'm concerned, and I'll make sure that we have meaningful help for those babies, those people who've had their schools demolished, infrastructure destroyed, homes obliterated. I want to see justice for them.
Did you vote for that Israel funding bill last evening, Congressman, or did you not stay for that?
No, I got there so that I could cast one vote at the end and another vote at the beginning, and I left. But I voted against the bill because there's nothing in there for the Palestinians, the people who are suffering too. What Hamas did is deplorable, horrible, and I would never associate myself with them. I've signed on the resolutions denouncing Hamas, demanding the return of people who have been taken as captives. And I'm going to stand by that to the ends of the earth until my last breath. But I also know this. I can't condemn the killing of Israeli babies and then condone the killing of Palestinian babies. I can't do that. Now, there's some who do it. I'm not casting aspersions on them. I'm saying to you that as a matter of conscience, as a moral imperative, I've got to see something for those people because I voted for over $50 billion in aid to Israel since I've been in Congress. And I don't regret my votes, but here's what I do regret. I regret that the bombs that have been used, some of that artillery, those munitions, they were used because we provided funding to the Israelis, and they have taken that, and I don't think it was used judiciously. So I'm concerned about those babies.
Well, it does appear we're going to be providing quite a bit more. Congressman Al Green is joining us live from his hospital bed right now after making that surprise appearance last evening during the impeachment vote in the House. Congressman, I'm wondering, before you leave us, if your doctors okayed that, if they thought it was a good idea for you to leave. Because, Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene are claiming that they were hiding you and that the Democrats somehow pulled a fast one at the last minute.
Thank you for addressing the issue. There was no trickery involved. I spoke to my physicians here when I saw on television, I'm lying here in the hospital bed, and I see that they're going to bring up this vote. So I talked to the staff here at the hospital. I talked to the physicians, my surgical team. I talked to the administration, and I had to negotiate with them. I had to sign a document explaining to me the possible harm that could befall me. I did it, and I called Speaker Jeffries. Yes, they were reluctant to do it, I will be candid, because they were concerned about me, and I love them for being concerned. But I had to cast this vote. This is my job. So I talked to Speaker Jeffries. I called him, and I explained to him that I was about to take an Uber. My staff was trying to get an Uber so that I could get to the Capitol. And he, first of all, said, Al, your health is the first thing that you have to consider. And after I convinced him that I was going to come, he said, well, look, we'll provide transportation. And that's the extent of his involvement. He did not demand that I come. He did not request that I come. He did not beseech. He didn't implore. He said, if you're coming, we'll give you transportation. I guess as a leader, he felt embarrassed that one of his members is coming from a hospital in an Uber to vote. So when I get there, I go into the attending physician's area, and they had a bed for me. So I went to bed. I was reclined. I was in bed, and they were checking my heart. They were checking my pulse rate, if you will, checking to make sure my blood pressure was in order. I had two nurses attending me while I was there, and I was waiting on the Mayorkas vote. And I'm sorry if they were thrown off because I didn't come up for another vote, but I didn't come for that vote. I didn't want to make a spectacle by going out there and sitting in a wheelchair in the midst of all of those people who were gathered and having it become more about my sitting there in a wheelchair than the purpose for my being there. So when I got there, they pushed me in. I took my card and I put my card in that terminal myself. There are people who are saying that I didn't really vote. I did. I put the card in the terminal and I voted. And after I voted, David Scott, who was seated right near me, said, Al, you just tied the vote. They can't impeach him. I had no idea when I put the card in that would happen. And after that was said to me, I was waiting on the next vote. I voted, which happened right afterward, not right because they were looking for me or something, I'm told. So I put the card in, I voted the second time, and I left. But I was not pulled to the hill. I didn't have a leadership demanding that I come. In fact, I saw Speaker Pelosi. She will always be Speaker Pelosi to me. I saw Speaker Pelosi as I was going into the attending physician's office, Dr. Monahan. He arranged for me to have that. This was a part of my deal so that I could get to the Hill. So I was taken care of there with great professional hands. I was taken care of here. And it was all done to get me there to cast my vote. And here's why. Because I know this secretary. Baby at Texas Children's Hospital that needed help. The hospital got in touch with me and said this child had been taken across the border. He was not a citizen in an area with his mom where he had no support system. And they needed to have him back because he was a dialysis patient. I contacted the secretary. This process of parole is what got that child back and saved his life, in my opinion.
Yeah, I understand.
And for people to say that parole is being abused, this is not a gate to let the world in. It's a means by which people who genuinely need some help can get it. And
well, it's sure looking like the president's going to still have that authority unless something very important here changes, Congressman. We've got the rules that we have on the books. We only have a minute left, Al Green. Do you know when you're going to be released from the hospital, just quickly?
I do not know when I'll be released. I'm in great hands. These are professionals. And when they say I can go, I will leave.
Well, I appreciate your joining us from the hospital bed, my goodness, and I hope that your recovery continues successfully as Al Green is treated for emergency surgery, recovering, I should say, from emergency surgery, leaving his bed last night to cast what turned out to be the deciding vote in the at least first impeachment vote for Alejandro Mayorkas. The speaker says there will be another and it will pass. Al Green agreed with that.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
It's the moment of truth for the border deal. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Senate prepares to vote now on a deal said to be dead on arrival in both chambers. With funding for Ukraine and Israel attached, we're going to have a live report from Capitol Hill in just a moment as Kailey Leinz joins us live from Washington here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kailey, this is going to be an interesting exercise because we seem to know that this vote is going to fail, but there will be a second vote that could pass.
Potentially. The second vote, of course, would not include anything related to border security, despite what we had heard for months was a demand from Republicans in the Senate that border security be included to pass anything for Israel and Ukraine. It might turn out that Israel and Ukraine aid does indeed pass, along with some other supplemental funding requests that have been made, and border security goes nowhere.
So it's pretty amazing to think, after all that, the teeth gnashing, the hand wringing, the endless debating, the behind closed doors conversations, the name calling, they could have just passed Ukraine funding from the start?
Yeah, but even if it passes in the Senate, has anything actually changed in the House where
Great questions.
It was pretty clear very early on that if Speaker Mike Johnson put something with Ukraine aid on the floor, then he might not be Speaker Mike Johnson for much longer.
That's right. He did say today, though, speaking with reporters, that he was going to wait to see what the Senate sent over.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance. Let's bring in Jonathan Tamari, Bloomberg government, reporting live from Capitol Hill right now. He's in the Russell Rotunda, where things are buzzing with a lot of uncertainty today. Jonathan, thanks for joining us here. When do we get this vote? How do you think it plays out in the Senate?
So it could be within the next few hours here. They're supposed to start right about now, in fact, this first vote on the compromise that you just described, the compromise that's going nowhere, the combination of border security and foreign aid, that is, we know, is going to fail. And pretty soon after that, Chuck Schumer wants to move to a foreign aid only package. And that's kind of where the big question is. Can that pass? It seems like there's enough Republican support for it. I think a big question will be how much support and how big, if it does advance. Obviously, this is just the first procedural step. But if it advances, how big a vote is there for that? And does that send a signal of the level of support over to the House?
Well, yeah, it becomes a question now of what House leadership is potentially going to do. But it feels like we're having leadership questions, not just in the House, but in the Senate as well. What is the buzz on Capitol Hill this morning about Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions about his grip on power in the Republican conference, and that's not something that's been said very often about Mitch McConnell. But he has been a staunch advocate for supporting Ukraine, first on its own, then as part of a border package. And both of those ideas have been blocked by his conference. And so there is a question of how much he can steer it. And it's just one sign of how much the Republican Party has shifted away from kind of the old guard, from Mitch McConnell, from the Wall Street Journal editorial board, from the Chamber of Commerce, all of whom supported this compromise, towards Donald Trump, who opposed it and who managed to sway a significant number of Republican senators to side with him.
Pretty amazing stuff here. If indeed this standalone bill passes the Senate, will it truly be entertained in the House, Jonathan, or is it just too early to tell? I know this idea emerged a short time ago. The White House says that it's behind this, but it's going to be up to the Speaker, right?
It is, and to be clear, they can't pass the bill today. They can start the procedure to pass it. Republicans are going to want to have a chance to vote on some amendments. If it does eventually pass, I think the big question is what Speaker Johnson does. He has, been steered significantly by the right wing of his party, which is very skeptical of Ukraine aid. He has said that he thinks it's important to support Ukraine, but he has voted against aid in the past. So I think it's a big mystery as to what he will do. And I think even if this bill does pass the Senate, we'll all be waiting to see what Donald Trump says, because that seems to have significant sway with Republicans here on Capitol Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and certainly President Biden made many attempts to call attention to his belief that Trump is the one calling the shots here when he spoke from the White House yesterday. In regard to what happens in the House going forward from here, we have a lot of questions about Speaker Johnson, but as Joe was just talking to our political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, about this, where is Tom Emmer in this, Jonathan. He is the whip. Isn't it his job to be counting the votes and make sure things like yesterday, the failure of an impeachment vote for Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, the failure of the standalone Israel package doesn't happen?
Yeah, it is his job, and there's certainly some criticism that's going from behind the scenes to some people actually putting their names on it and being critical of the job he has done. And obviously he's got a very difficult job with such a closely divided conference, but these are the kind of things that the House puts up as a political message, as a message of what they're trying to do as a counterweight to the Senate. And when they can't get those things through the House, they basically undercut all of their own leverage. And it is a hugely embarrassing moment to fail on something that's supposed to unite your party.
All right, Jonathan Tamari of Bloomberg Government, thank you so much for joining us live from the Rotunda on Capitol Hill today. We appreciate it. Now let's go to someone who used to be in that Rotunda quite often, now is objectively observing Congress from the outside. Former Congressman Denver Riggleman is with us, the Republican from the state of Virginia. Denver, it's always great to have you on the show, especially in a week like this one, where just in the last few days we have seen the release and subsequent absolute collapse of a border deal. We have seen the failure not just of an attempted impeachment of a cabinet secretary, but also of the attempt to pass more than $17 billion in aid to Israel. What exactly is happening here?
I think there's three things. I think it's a failure of leadership. I think it's a failure of imagination. And I think it's the unserious nature of Congress right now. And, with 2024 looming, you're looking on the GOP side, you're seeing this absolute need to satisfy Mar-a-Lago and President Trump. And when you're looking at the impeachment and losing 216 to 214, you're seeing a lack of leadership on the GOP side that was something completely unserious and that should have never happened to begin with. And we're looking at Israel aid. You're looking at two issues. You're looking at Democrats, and I'm trying to unpack a lot here, Kailey. So you're looking at Democrats, right, that want aid to Gaza. And on the right, they're looking for offsets for any type of standalone funding bill. So right now, you have complete chaos because of so much unserious legislation or unserious, I would say, negotiations. You had the House actually, undermine the Senate negotiation for the border bill. You have the ridiculous impeachment. Without a border bill, they're still impeaching, even though they're the ones who stopped the border bill, talking about the GOP. Then you have the standalone aid package where the left and the right have their own reasons for opposing it. So right now you have chaos based on the 2024 election year and based on the lack of adults in the room.
I want to ask you about Mitch McConnell. Congressman, everybody talks about Mike Johnson on the motion to vacate. The fact of the matter is it doesn't look like anybody wants that job right now, and who else would hold the gavel? So let's just focus on the Senate for 1 minute, because we're hearing some pretty tough talk from some fairly senior senators about Mitch McConnell here. Ted Cruz, not a shock, calling for him to step down. Mike Lee, who called the border deal a betrayal, is demanding new leadership in the Senate. Josh Hawley, he says it's not James Lankford's fault, it's Mitch McConnell's fault. And Ron Johnson got our attention with a tweet or an X with a meme mocking Mitch McConnell, which makes him look like Charlie Brown just tried to kick the football. Kirsten Sinema is Lucy in this case. What's about to happen to Mitch McConnell? Because it sure seems like the political world has shifted under his feet.
Well, I think when you look at those four specifically, you're looking at four, individuals who also bought into Stop the Steal. So they deal in fantasy anyway. That's pretty much their bread and butter. I think McConnell is actually still pretty safe. Now, you never know. They could be trying to whip. There could be things going on behind the scenes about Mitch specifically, but he's pretty good at this. And when you're looking at four, sort of extreme figures like those individuals, especially, right now, they just really don't have a leg to stand on, screaming betrayal and things of that nature. It sounds like to me that, again, they're getting their marching orders from Mar-a-Lago. These are Trump talking points. He doesn't like McConnell anyway. You know what he talked about, his wife, those unfortunate remarks that were dang close to racist. Yeah. I think what you're seeing right now are four individuals who already like to live on the fantasy edge, looking at their polling and their fundraising, look at what's happening in their states, looking at their own reelection campaigns coming out in the future, and wanting to satisfy who they think might be the next president of the United States and Donald Trump. I think that's why they're screaming like that. But I think McConnell right now is fairly safe because, when you got the crazies in the back of the elementary school room screaming, you don't worry about it too much unless you have a full-on coup, which who knows what would happen in the Senate right now. I just don't think McConnell's in that much danger yet.
Well, you talk about some of the crazies in the body, which I guess speaks to a wider question that could be applicable to both the Senate and the House right now. If the issue is of the body itself or of leadership that isn't actually the ones that are leading that body, if the one leading the body is, as you say, the former president.
Yeah, listen, Mike Johnson is in a hard position because he's been hooked with marionette strings from Mar-a-Lago, so he really can't get out of that lane. I mean, he's going to do what he needs to do in order to keep the former president happy based on what they're seeing in all the districts, right? And based on the favorability ratings of Trump in many of these far-right districts, and in many districts that, you're talking about the Freedom Caucus, that's their bread and butter, right, is the Trump Protection Society that they have. So Mike Johnson this is beyond him on a leadership level. If he can't step out and do what's right for the country without having Donald Trump looking over his shoulder, this chaos is going to continue. So there's a rot in the body of Congress, and all that comes from Mar-a-Lago. It's a Florida rot. And, everybody right now looking at their reelection campaigns, as you know, for the House, it's every 2 years. They want to make sure that they're on the right side of the favorability ratings for Trump in each district. So they're going to scream and yell things that are unserious. And you saw that today, right? Andy Biggs coming out and saying the Democrats just played a better game than us on the impeachment of Mayorkas. If they think this is a game, this is really a disservice to United States citizens. And I think we're to a point now that if we have sitting congressmen saying it's just a game and they got the better of us in this game, we're in real trouble because they're not looking at the importance of this to the United States. They're looking at the importance of Donald Trump in their own reelection campaigns, and that could be very dangerous.
Wow. Well, if this is a Florida rot, that isn't going to change anytime soon, Denver. I'm wondering what will happen over the course of the next month. Are we going to get a budget? Is the government going to shut down? Does this Ukraine funding pass on its own, or are we just incapable of doing anything?
I had a great intelligence instructor, Joe. He told me one time, he said, the only way to tell the future is to wait till it happens. And trying to predict Congress is really ridiculous. It's like, it's trying to wrestle snakes. It's slimy and they're going to bite you. But I think what you got right now is maybe you might get a CR, maybe you might get, some kind of ability to extend the budget right now. I don't know how they're actually going to process that, but their track record isn't very good. I think you're going to have chaos in the next month. And I think a lot of it, again, is going to be the talking points for Donald Trump. It's just that simple on the GOP side. Democrat side just going to have to roll with it and try to do the best they can in that circumstance. I mean, it's chaos right now. And it is a function of the leadership, but also there is some body rot in Congress right now.
Well, and then there's the question of a potential leadership change as we talk about how right now the Senate is going to be voting as to whether or not to pass this bill that does not include border security, just the other supplemental requests when it comes to Israel and Ukraine aid. Then if it does pass, Mike Johnson's going to have a choice to make as to whether he wants to put that on the floor and potentially risk a motion to vacate in the process. Does anyone come to mind to you, Denver, as to who would replace him if that were to happen?
After all the votes with McCarthy,
right?
I don't know.
A few others have tried. Yeah,
I have a better chance than a lot of people to run for speaker right now, right? I think, but I do believe, if you're looking across leadership right now, if they had to go back and do it over again, I think they would go back to a Tom Emmer type for speaker on the House side. You might see Scalise roll back up. I think if Scalise comes back, and I hope he does right after his cancer treatment, I mean, nobody wishes that on anybody. I think Steve Scalise might be back in play as speaker if he comes back, regardless of what his prognosis or diagnosis is. I think he's really the only one, him and maybe Emmer, that can rally the GOP to what they need to do. There's one problem, though. It's Donald Trump. And he might want somebody else in there that's absolutely insane. He's not a big fan of Emmer. He's never been over the moon about Scalise. I know this personally. I just know that. So who would it be? Would it be a Matt Gaetz type? Impossible. It made too many enemies, too much of a charlatan. So again, guys, I think the Emmer Scalise, I think you're going to see some retreads from the prior vote that sort of come back out of the woodwork.
We're spending time with former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman of Virginia here on Bloomberg's Balance of Power. Kailey, I don't know if you saw this quote from Mitt Romney. Another fan of Mar-a-Lago. Denver, I want to read this to you. This is Mitt Romney talking to Punchbowl. Politics used to be the art of the possible. Now it is the art of the impossible, he says. This is the former standard bearer of the Republican Party, meaning let's put forward proposals that cannot possibly pass so that we can say to our respective bases, look how I'm fighting for you. He says we've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous. I don't mean to get too abstract here, Denver, but how do you make politics the art of the possible again?
Well, first, you got to stop the monkeys from throwing poo, right? I mean, they have to actually be more serious about their constituents as far as what's best for America rather than just getting reelected or trying to satisfy a rabid base. He's right. Senator Romney's right. It is the art of the impossible because right now, again, and I've said this over and over, if you don't have people who treat America first as their actual, I would say, priority, and making sure that we're protected, that we make compromises or we make decisions with integrity, we can't get back to any semblance of the art of the possible. We can't get back to the days of that type of compromise because you have a charlatan, you have a demagogue, right, who's pushing this type of messaging, and it's not based on fact. It's not based on any type of reality. Right? This is a person who has, Donald Trump, who has a track record of believing in the fantastical. I mean, he probably believes The Lord of the Rings is a documentary. So I think that's the kind of issues you have right now. Is you got to stop the poo flinging, and you got to have people who actually know the difference between reality and fantasy, and who put the American people first rather than their own base desires.
You talk about Donald Trump and some of his beliefs, which include firmly that he won the 2020 election, even though that's factually inaccurate. And just on that note, Denver, keeping in mind you assisted the January 6th committee in their work, there is now reportedly a chance that a 2020 election denier from North Carolina could be atop the RNC if Trump has his way, and Ronna McDaniel, as reported, does indeed step down as chair after South Carolina. How concerning do you find that?
It means the party has been totally taken over by fantasists. And again, it also means the party is firmly in control of Donald Trump in a way that we can't even imagine at this point. I mean, if you have an election denier, that's the RNC chair. What does that say about one whole parties and their ability to grasp reality or to look at facts or to make facts-based decisions, right? To make sort of reality-based, strategies on what they should be doing as a party or what they should be doing for the United States. I have no respect for anybody who comes out as an election denier or they think the J6ers were just, peaceful participants in a rally. I mean, it's absolutely, it's almost like they've been inhaling fumes and now they're believing they're crazy themselves. And I think that again should worry the American people that are on the sane side, that you got crazy coming to a head. Not only is the person running for president the presumptive nominee for the GOP, and I was a Republican, but also you have a crazy at the head of the party who might be even, nuttier than Donald Trump.
This is why he makes bourbon now in Virginia. Denver Riggleman, it's great to see you, sir, the former Republican congressman with us, trying to rationalize, as we all are, what's happening before our eyes here in the Capitol.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Really one of the biggest stories of the day yesterday, and another multi-story day. Kailey was hearing from the appeals court. Donald Trump can be prosecuted, but there are just as many questions today, if not more, about what that's going to mean for the cases against him, particularly Jack Smith's case here in Washington. Yeah,
the case, the trial of which was supposed to, until last week, start March 4th, until the judge canceled that date because we were awaiting this immunity decision. Now we have the immunity call from the appeals court, but that doesn't mean this is all done and dusted. He has until Monday to try to appeal it if he so chooses to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will decide whether or not they want to hear these arguments. It
becomes a job telling all these cases apart.
Yes.
Tomorrow, we're going to start looking at his eligibility or not to be on the ballot, remembering this 14th Amendment case that goes back to Colorado. This is going to be an important ruling for his campaign, too.
Yeah, and a lot of Supreme Court influence potentially on the 2024 election and its outcome. So on that note, let's turn now to Jim Zirin, who is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, also the host of Conversations with Jim Zirin on PBS. Jim, it's always great to have you on the program. If we could just begin with the question of immunity. Obviously, the appeals court yesterday said that Trump is now citizen Trump, therefore he is not immune from prosecution. How quickly do you expect that this question in its entirety will be resolved if, as expected, he appeals this to SCOTUS?
Well, it could be resolved, Kailey, next Monday or maybe the day after, because the key thing is whether the Supreme Court is going to stay the trial pending their consideration of the case. They may take the case but not put a stay, an emergency stay in place, or they may deny a stay and also deny cert, discretionary review, or they may take the case and impose a stay. If they impose a stay, the question is, how soon will they get to the merits? That would have to be briefing, and there would have to be oral argument. And then there's a serious question as to whether the case could be tried before the election. I suspect that the Supreme Court is going to allow the case to be tried as soon as possible, because there's very little precedent for an appellate court staying a trial once it's ruled. And the D.C. Circuit opinion is so airtight and so well framed and considered that I can't see any way that the Supreme Court is going to reverse the case.
You're not the first to describe the appeals court in that fashion, Jim. So in that world, does the Supreme Court make a ruling to that effect or just not take up the case?
It depends. The Supreme Court is up in the ethereal atmosphere, so they could just say cert denied, full stop. They could say cert granted, but not impose an emergency stay so the trial could go forward. Or they could impose a stay and then set a timetable for their consideration of the case. It only takes 4 justices to grant cert, and it takes 5 justices to grant a stay. Often, as a courtesy, one of the judges who's against cert will vote to grant the stay so that the status quo can be preserved for the 4 who think the case should be reviewed.
Well, of course, all 9 will be hearing the arguments in the 14th Amendment case tomorrow, Jim, as Joe was talking about, the question of Colorado's decision to kick him off the ballot in that state because they say he incited insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. I know we've discussed that 14th Amendment engaged in insurrection. You're right. And that's the language in the 14th Amendment, an important distinction to make. What is the strongest argument against overturning Colorado's ruling that could be made tomorrow?
Well, the strongest argument against it is that the text of the 14th Amendment is very clear that anyone who was engaged in an insurrection and who was an officer of the United States and therefore has betrayed his oath to the United States is disqualified from attaining further office. So it was probably designed to keep Jefferson Davis off the ballot, because they were all afraid Jefferson Davis might run for president. But it has vitality today. And there's a brilliant brief by a conservative retired judge, J. Michael Ludig, in which he goes through all of the clauses of the 14th Amendment and addresses the conservative justices on the Supreme Court in language that they've used in other cases, and shows how textualism and originalism leads you to the conclusion that Trump should be disqualified.
Jim Zirin, we see a tweet here from the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin, of course, the chair, calling on Justice Clarence Thomas to recuse himself in the upcoming 14th Amendment case. Do you agree?
I think he should. I doubt that he will. I think he's going to be there. But I wonder whether Clarence Thomas looks at some of the decisions he's made in the past and some of the language he's used, particularly in Second Amendment gun cases, as to how the Constitution should be interpreted, whether he has any offline to escape voting for the disqualification of Donald Trump.
There is an effort underway in Congress right now. It's being led by the Republican Congressman from Florida, Matt Gaetz, to pass a resolution in the House that would declare that Donald Trump did not engage in insurrection. If that were to pass, and it's a big if here, would that have any legal bearing in this case?
Well, that's what Franklin Roosevelt used to call an awfully iffy question. I don't think it will pass any more than the impeachment of Mayorkas is going to fly. But even if it were to pass, it would have no legal significance whatsoever. Remember, there was a 5-day hearing or trial in Colorado. Trump was given every opportunity to present evidence. He didn't testify. The evidence that came in was largely unobjected to and consisted of statements Trump made or videotape evidence. We all saw it. We all know what happened. And there's absolutely no question that there was an insurrection. And there's really no question that Trump engaged in it.
Boy, the level of uncertainty here is great. I realize, Jim Zirin, but with all of this, what do you think is the first trial to get underway? Will it be complete before the election?
Well, there is an element of uncertainty. Clearly, if the Supreme Court denies an emergency stay, and that's the real issue, there could be a trial before the election. There could be a trial this summer. If, however, they stay the matter and the trial date is uncertain, the first trial will be Alvin Bragg's election interference case in New York involving the payoff to the porn star Stormy Daniels.
Yeah. Amazing, considering what we've heard about that case. It's great to see you, Jim Zirin. Thank you for joining us here once again on Bloomberg. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Kailey, it's interesting when we talk to voices of experience from the legal world like that, they very frequently arrive at the same conclusions on timing and potential outcome here. It's going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
Well, and a lot of it will depend on whether or not the Supreme Court decides to hear, and expeditiously so, the former president's appeal on the immunity decision. So we'll, of course, continue to have that covered for you. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.